Welcome to the Independence by Design podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a business owner and ways to get unstuck from the day-to-day so we can design a business that gives us a life of independence. What's up, and thanks for tuning back in. Just a reminder that if you want to watch the video and listen, Spotify now has the video and the audio available, so check that out if you wanted to. Today, I've got my buddy Jimmy Fritz on the show. I've known Jimmy for almost 10 years now. He's a second-generation owner of a company called The Wedding Shop, as well as Kennedy Blue, so it's a retail space in Minnesota, as well as an e-commerce business in the bridesmaids space, and he's scaled these businesses to quite the size to the point where he's a national player. And I think the important thing that we're going to be diving into is Jimmy's evolution and journey as an owner, operator, and second generation, because I've worked with Jimmy on multiple of my companies over the years, and he has continuously evolved and put work into himself in the business to constantly be elevating himself into that ownership, or at least the ownership mindset. So Jimmy is going to talk about how they were focused on vanity metrics after he got into the business and the dynamics with his parents and himself, but then how those vanity metrics led to some issues, but then he then integrated EOS, how that still was not the be-all end-all because he was running into some issues like what is the goal and how does it impact his ownership objectives. COVID hits, then he had to right size again, and then how he's got to where he is today. And so towards the last half of the podcast, he's going to dive really deep into how he's taken his goals of time, free cash flow, and wealth, rolled those into the operations using the financial roadmap and making sure that all of the operations are tied specifically to the ownership goals, and then making sure that those financials and then the GL codes and the income statement metrics are tied to then EOS and the rocks, as well as then to the employees, and then how he's managing the operations from an owner operator perspective. And Jimmy constantly is saying it's not this easy. It's a constant continuous improvement, and he has put in the hard work, and I'm very grateful for him sharing his true story here. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jimmy. All right, man. So this is gonna be fun. You've been working at this for a while.
2 years.
So I was trying to think about how to jumpstart the conversation, Fritz. Maybe just we can put a link to the previous podcast that you and I did, where you were talking about your CFO and stuff like that. But like, I think maybe putting some context behind the conversation, because we're going to jump into what you've been doing with your annual planning, your budgeting, tying it into EOS, 3-statement, like all the shit that I talk about and that you have been working really hard at. We're going to get to that, but maybe just bring us back to like put some context behind this. Like, why are you doing this? How did you get into this? And like, I even think about the conversations you and I had at Vegas years and years ago, and like this mindset shift that you've had. I don't know how you want to put some context onto this.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's kind of like it started, I'm second generation family business. So, my parents always had like a really well-run business. They had financials. They were using their accountant, who was probably like 80 at the time. And so like we would get, accurate financials, but they weren't very helpful, and they were generally super late. And so like over time it was, for my parents, and I think a lot of the hard part of like transitioning from first to second generation is they didn't have really good handles on like how much money they have. Is the company making a lot or not? Because everything was just so, done for tax purposes, probably more than anything else, and not like
the K1 annual take home. Because you guys have a bunch of buildings too. So you guys have had like, and because you got retail and e-commerce, right? So that's the setup.
Yep. And it was, but then there's the real estate that they owned, and there was so much stuff commingled. Not from like a tax perspective, but just from like, okay, so what's the rent on the building? Who pays the for the roof? And then it just was coming down.
Jim and Lois get X amount of money or more each year, right?
Right. And so like, we did start sorting through a bunch of that. And I think that kind of helped be like, oh, there is actually a decent amount of profit, and it can support.
When did you join the business? And what is the business? Why don't you give everybody just because we're going to get into a lot of the nitty gritty, but I think and here, let me pause for a sec. Cause like when I say pause, just I'll give you where I'm thinking about this, Fritz, is that I just think about where you were at when you and I met. I mean, you were ready to quit, first of all. And then, you were starting up as the side hustle because there was all this conflict. And then you and I, it's been 8 years where it's like, hey, what's the what's the goal? And I've watched your goal evolve because you've got this relationship with your businesses that I think is very healthy. It's a lot of freaking work, but you've like recalibrated your relationship with your companies, what you're doing with the operations. And that's really what I want, as we're having these conversations with the group that you and I are in, like, it's that mindset shift that you've had. Like, where were you at, like with your head and the relationship with your business and your family, and like, where are you at now? And like, does that make sense?
Yeah, well, so it's a wedding business. So the wedding shop in St. Paul, plus we have another e-commerce direct-to-consumer brand, Kennedy Blue. So we're selling wedding dresses, bridesmaids dresses. We do partner up with like a tuxedo vendor. But I mean, this was like, my parents were like, retail store, yellow pages, flowers to, everything. It was the one-stop wedding shop. And as time has progressed, it's like, okay, well, you don't really make money doing this or that. So we've been able to optimize the business. But again, like to your point, like a lot of it was just revenue driven and how many employees do you have? So there's a lot, I wouldn't say total vanity metrics because obviously more sales generally does help with some problems. But
there was this assumption that the more revenue between the wedding shop and all the different ancillary services that you guys had would somehow kick out enough cash for Jim and Lois.
Yeah, right.
At the end of the day, like there was like this like assumption over. I mean, it's been decades, right? And you guys are doing 7 figures of both the businesses, so they're not small companies either.
Yeah, right. Well, and I mean, in your time too, right? Like when did I get started? I was 9 years old. And my parents would work all day on a Saturday, and then we'd go catering at night. And so I would go with my sister to like these catering halls, and we'd work till like 11, 12 o'clock at night. And there was a part in the 90s where I was like, this is just terrible. Like nobody wants to be on a Saturday night spending their time serving food to hundreds of people and with all the stresses. I mean, it's like working in a restaurant then, right? So there was like this evolution of like services and product offering that was occurring. And then you also had like this e-commerce and online phase coming in. And so like, think about how many businesses used to just do everything. And now they're like, we do this one thing really well, or these 2 things really well. But it's hard, right? Because the challenge is if we don't do alterations, that was hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. But like we all knew it was losing money and it was all of our complaints. So, we had financials and we had information to help like, know like, okay, we'll lose this much revenue, but like it was always scary to be like, well, hopefully we're still going to stay profitable, right? Because this is income in the summer and you have fixed costs and you have all these things. And we just never really had like, we had good financials that were for tax purposes, but
which the complications that I saw, like going back to like you and I, what was it? It was on Grand. What was the bar that you and I met at?
Wow.
No, it was the one that shut down and now is the red, whatever.
Yeah, it's Wild Onion.
What? Oh, yeah, that's right. Because
but I mean, like
we had yeah, I know you did. We both did. We were like, and we met, and you were making pennies on the dollar from what you're making right now. You're like, screw this shit. I don't want to be working at the family business because both your parents were in the business. You had your sister, you had the retail. You were starting the e-commerce. I think that was when it was first starting. And your dad, I mean, we were literally in a meeting. Your dad goes, I don't know about this online hocus pocus bullshit. and now you've scaled that, beyond belief. But like, so I say like, I'm just kind of painting some pictures because like, other than jumping, because back to Fritz, like you're a big podcast listener. If you're listening in, you want to know like what the hell was going on before someone got to where we're going to get to, where you're talking about tying all of your stuff together, getting out like. So you were sitting in that meeting that you and I, 8 years ago, ready, exhausted beyond belief. And then there was kind of there's been multiple evolutions I've watched you go through to get where you're at today. And so like, what changed? And, back in like 2016, 2017, where you're like, okay, what was that? What changed with the 2 entities and you and your sister and your parents? And then, because I mean, you started hiring a president, you had EOS. I mean, do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah. Well, I think the hard part was like, when you're in your 20s, and I mean, I made like this company was successful, right? And it was, and I don't have any expenses because I don't have kids. I mean, I'm not married at the time. And so like you could just kind of go to work, do your thing. It's a family business. There's definitely perks and benefits. But as everybody got older and like people started having families, it's like, okay, well now I need to Now we need to probably look at like what a market wage would look like. But if you're coming back to like, I don't know how much, if we can afford all of this stuff. It was a lot of fear-based accounting that was making these decisions. And so it's just like if you don't have a set bonus program and you're like, okay, well, how hard am I working to sell all this stuff? And like, will I get paid or will I not get paid? And you would think that like more companies would be set up to handle that. But I mean, even now, I don't have a perfect, bonus program in place for my staff. And some of them have shared concerns about that. And so I was in the same situation, right? I'm working all the time. But my parents were like part in, part out, because they wanted to kind of start thinking about retirement, I'm sure, but they weren't comfortable with their money. So it just compounded into this situation where, okay, there's no plan. I make decent money, but it's not like I couldn't go get a job elsewhere working less hours and not having to deal with all the family dynamics. Like, am I going to be the one running it? Am I not? And so when you compound all this stuff, it's like, man, I could just go start a marketing company, work less hours, and then have full control over my life. And, to a lot of probably more entrepreneurial people, a lot of it is about at least perceived control of your time.
Perceived control. well said, right? We might think we have, but it's a chaotic, nonstop control.
Yeah. So, like that was it, right? So we had to just be like, okay, let's focus on my parents first and be like, are they financially able to just walk away tomorrow if they could, for example? And like what we found out is my parents have been always super conservative. They're good with saving money. They invested in a lot of real estate. And it was like, I think the day that they were told like, hey, even if like the wedding shop just went away tomorrow, you could still live in your retirement without ever worrying about money again. Like 99.9% chance.
I remember we were in, there was a meeting that we were all in, and like Fritz Junior can't F this up.
Yeah. There's nothing
like,
do. So that was kind of like phase one of like, I remember then we were on a call with, it was attorney at the time. And he was just like, listen, your kids don't like, you started the business because you wanted to be entrepreneurial. If your kids are really entrepreneurial, they don't want their parents telling them.
Is that Jim Carlisle? Or is that Wayne?
Jim Carlisle, yeah.
Okay.
And my dad was like, I thought about that, and it's like, it's totally right. The reason we did this is because we wanted to be independent, again, and perceived control or whatever of your time. And so I think my dad just kind of like stepped out after that. My mom's still involved, and my dad still will like advise and do stuff, but like from a day-to-day perspective, they got out, and that allowed us then to jump into EOS because that was always a hard part, right? It's like either we're all doing EOS or we're not going to do it at all. And we tried to do this like hybrid model, and that didn't work.
Well, and you guys, you have two entities. You have the retail, but then you have the e-commerce that you're also partnered up with someone else on. That complicates. So you have the e-commerce that you've got to partner with, and then you've got the retail where it's the family. And then so there was a lot of clarity that you guys all went through for ownership entities, and then like role clarity. I watched even you, Caroline, and then you started. You had a couple of fits and starts with presidents, but like EOS and that operational structure started guiding that once you had the clarity kind of on the bigger picture, right?
Well, yeah. So what was happening is like, because I couldn't produce the income I needed from the wedding shop and Kennedy Blue at the time, I was like, well, I'll just do like essential oils and I'll start selling that with marketing services and, very good visionary ideas of like, idea after idea. I think I had a skincare line, an essential oils line, a marketing company, along with all these what. There was some logic behind all this. I'm like, well, this could be some recurring revenue. We'll tie it to Brian. But like we did EOS, and you quickly start seeing your whole team's like, Jimmy, like none of these things are making any money, and they're just distractions from the core services. And so everybody got really aligned, including myself, into like, okay, this is what we're going to focus on. And so then the first year was super painful because we're going through this transition. Like people are now recognizing like the accountability levels are increasing. But I'm like, okay, I like this now. I thought EOS would be, I like going into meetings and just BSing for an hour and a half. I'm a talker. I'm extroverted. But like, I'm like, oh, everybody's working on the same page. And you'd see, like my highest paid people were the ones not getting rocks done essentially. So we go into 2020 with the best start of the year ever, and then COVID hits. And Pat, who's your friend and my CFO at the time, he's like, well, we're going to be closing down for however much time. And I'm like, we have enough money? What do things look like? And that was the first time where we're like, okay, we really got to get this financial statement to make sense from an operation perspective. Not because like screw taxes at this point, like, do we have enough money to stay open? And it turns out we did, which was great. And it really put my mind at ease. But it really also was the first time where we had to look at, a customer comes in and orders a dress today. She gives us $1,000, let's just say. Technically, I have $1,000 in cash in the bank, but I also owe money for a wedding dress to the manufacturer.
Yeah.
So,
Let's pause there for a second. Cause like, I want to get into your customer journey as well, because like that's one of the things that you've done really well of like, I've got a situation down here. So like, cause like, I want to talk about where we want to go with this, but I think there's some, going back to the EOS transitioning to this mindset of like the ownership mindset that you and I've been talking about for years. I eventually want to get to, Fritz, where we're going from your revenue, your client acquisition, into the revenue codes, all the way through the financials, all the way through the free cash flow to like your ownership goals. But like, because you've put a lot of this stuff in place to get that information, and you've had different versions of this stuff that I think you'll be very helpful for the audience to know what you've tried. But before we get there, that the mindset shift, right? So like EOS is awesome for the operations, for all the things that you said, organizing the chaos, getting the right people in the right spots. But like, how many times over the years you've been going, what the hell is the point of all this? Right? What's the goal? And like, it's you and I have been just fixated on that for years. So like, how did your perception change as through our conversations of the time, free cash flow, and the wealth? Like, I mean, like, because that shifted your priorities on how you were going to drive the operations.
right. So at the time, it was like solve financial problem independently for Jimmy first. And then problem B was like, okay, now I have, like, we still weren't super profitable, right? Like we were, probably 5% EBITDA or something. And so it's like, we're working a lot of hours to not drive that much profit. And so like, what's wrong? What are we doing wrong? And so with EOS, what it does do is it does get everybody going a direction. Now, that direction, you want it to be the right direction. And I think fortunately we did make the right decisions and go the right direction. But yeah, like forecasting, our first meeting, I mean, we were setting, 8-figure ridiculous goals. And I'm just like, how are we going to get from point A to point B? And this was even before I started thinking like, do I even care to get that big? Like, do I want to work that hard? Does everybody here want
to? Well, let's talk about, wasn't it 9 figures? Because you're like, yeah, let's be 100 million or whatever the hell it was. I mean, it's like because it was back to like the goals that you and I have talked about. I mean, it was like revenue goals. I mean, you guys are, I mean, for some context for the audience, I mean, are you the largest or one of the largest bridesmaids resellers in the country? Something like, I mean, because like you guys
I mean, certainly the retail stores has to be one of the largest in the country, if not the largest. And I mean, combined, I mean, there's probably a few like startup e-com companies that are bigger than us, but not many.
So like the question becomes, how do you get there? Right. I mean, like, and back when I first met you, I mean, dude, you had how many times I'd heard this story about how much you scale with the employee and the revenue count. You guys were losing money after like there was I don't know if it was not losing money, but there was you had like a lawsuit, you got all this shit going on at the same time. And you're like, and then you took a step back, recalibrated all that stuff for profit, for actual gross profit and net income, and then putting in EOS. But then you and I for so many years, it's like, what the hell is the point for Fritz, and how does the businesses get there? So talk about how your revenue goals and the big picture and the goals of EOS and your goals started to, well, not only were they different, but then how did you reconcile those two?
Well, so it actually did kind of culminate with the COVID part, because it was like EOS got everybody at least organized. Like we knew who had to go, we knew who and it wasn't like we had to let them go. People were like, I'm opting out. Software development was a prime example. Like we had a custom built website with a custom built back end, and we had a massive amount.
God bless you, Jamie. Right.
Right. And it was like, and the thing is like all custom development is expensive. And it's something that me personally sounded fun to just try to create the next Amazon or whatever we were thinking, until I started thinking about, okay, how much is this actually costing? And is this worth our time? And that's where it was like, we can shift to a platform like Shopify. It was like $199 a month to maintain a website.
Versus 6 figures, right?
Yeah, like 20. I mean, there was times where I was spending $30,000 a month on development. It was just so insane. So you know, we got aligned with all of that really quick. And so when we went into 2020, we were selling well because everybody was aligned. We were migrating off of all this custom development, which cost time and money, but we were seeing it. And then COVID hits, and it's like, Impact literally says, like, Jimmy, you're not going to cut fast enough. We have to just cut everything. And then we'll see how much cash we have. And then we'll see how long we have in terms of a run rate. And like, we had months and months of cash reserves, fortunately. We were so conservative, not really understanding that. I'm like, okay, well, we can totally wait this out, which is a fantastic position to be in. Because from a stress perspective, I'm like, well, all of our competitors will be out of business before we will be. So that was the like aha moment. So our most profitable year to date was 2020 when we were closed for 3 months.
And does that include the PPP and all that fake shit that got? I was going to say, I knew you. That was you. You've got that as an ad back, right? So like, it's actually operationally how you guys did.
Yes. And so we just were like, hey, here's a bunch of things we don't need anymore. And we just didn't bring them back on. So we were profitable in 2020, 2021, 2022. And even now, we're just still much more profitable than what we were prior because we had all these expenses that I think we thought we needed. But it's like they weren't really driving anything. That wasn't driving money. It wasn't driving profit. And so all that stuff got cut. And that's when it's like, okay, this is now what we need to really be looking at is how profitable can we be? And I think that once we saw it can be profitable, that's the changes.
Let's talk about like what, and that's where we're gonna get to how you built and work, like how you built your planning and how you like where you're at right now. But like what I've watched you is it went from revenue to then like all of the vanity metrics to then years we've been talking about normalized EBITDA and the multiple, right? Because you're talking about growing value. I mean, you've been doing that for years. But then, because like when you say profit, like it can be so convoluted, as you and I both know. You sit in a peer group meeting, everybody's like, I've got this much profit. Do you have any idea what anybody's talking about? Of course not. Is it gross profit? Is it net income? Is it normalized EBITDA? Or is it free cash flow? And that's where I've watched your evolution. As your education and evolution has happened, the goals have evolved. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, and so like maybe yeah, I mean, it's been so awesome to watch that, Fritz, because like, so that let's talk about like how you've shifted your goals and in the company and how that's then been, I don't know if you want to take that from there. Or.
I wish it was a little more glamorous in some ways, but it was like when you go from like not making, I mean, enough to like survive, but not really like get ahead to all of a sudden you're like 3 times your profit and you have EOS running. So it's not like it wasn't all me doing it. I didn't feel like that anymore. I'm like, well, this is amazing. So to some extent, it was even like, I wasn't even that worried about it because I'm like, well, we're so far ahead of where we were. This is great. And I'm not going to think about it. And so, we had 2-3 years. And to be fair to like, it was also somewhat economic, right? Like all the weddings were canceled in 2020. So then 2021, 2022 was just this huge boom of growth. And, I wouldn't say it didn't come without its big challenges, right? Like masking and sanitizing, all the anxiety around COVID was bad. But like by and large, we were profitable and everything was working. And then, then we start sending like crazy forecasts, right? Because we're like, well, we can just keep growing at this forever. I think like every, especially e-commerce business thought. And it was probably around 2023 where we just started seeing things like kind of just level out. And it's like, wow, now we're spending a lot more money thinking we're going to get 30-40% growth every year. And it's like, we spent 40% to get like 2% growth. I'm like, well, this is going to quickly get us back to the old model of top line sales with no profitability. And when you're growing at that pace too, it's just kind of a mess, right? Because you're hiring people, you're just throwing money at problems. And, it's not, and so it's like back to, okay, well, where do my priorities lie? Do I want this $100 million company with all this stress? I mean, there was times where we couldn't get dresses shipped out the door because they were sitting in our warehouse and we couldn't find employees to work. Like, that's not fun. And that's stressful for everybody. I mean, pretty much my entire corporate office was down shipping dresses and we were lowering our price. So we weren't even making as much money per unit. So, it's back to this, like, okay, what kind of business model do we want? And that's where I finally was like, okay, take another step back, do personal VTO. Where do my personal goals align? And then where does that align with the company? And I was like, oh, well, actually, if we could probably decrease sales by 20-30% and get the companies at a normal profitability, and I would be financially fine in our current situation. And so that's kind of how the evolution of where
it's been a lot of hard work. That's why I wanted you to give this context, is it's like, it's not this like perfect point, you know, I start here and then I come here and then everything's working. It's like, it's a slugfest to get to where you're at. And that's why I wanted to walk through this. And I mean, we just summarized 8 years worth of you eating shit in 20 minutes. So like, there was a lot more behind this too. But like, I think it's so helpful for people to understand. I mean, if you go put yourself, because you're a podcast listener too, like I keep saying, like if you're listening to this, you want to know that how someone got to where you're at. And so before we jump into, because I want to get into the mechanics, man, because you're so damn good at the mechanics, and that's what you've done over the last 3-4 months, especially with now that you got Pat back, is the independence by design ownership mindset of the time, cash flow, and wealth. You don't have to give any of the numbers if you don't want, but what I want is to let's use these concepts, because like you've been helping me over the years, Fritz, refine my thinking behind all this stuff, right? I mean, we have these conversations and it's like, okay, well, what's the goal? What's the goal behind Fritz's time? What do you want to do with the time? What kind of cash flow do you need that's not tied to your labor? And then what do you need your wealth to be, which could be outside assets, you know, and hopefully we got some that are going to outperform and help us rely less on other things. But like you got your wealth, but then how Kennedy Blue and the wedding shop and the real estate and all that shit fits into this. And that time, cash flow, wealth is your framework as you're about to, because again, we're getting to the mechanics behind this, but you have that as the non-negotiable, right? And that's what you're striving for. So everything that we're about to describe is built around that, correct?
Yeah, well, and to your point, like this is a lot of years summarized into like 30 minutes. And I don't want to make it seem like it was easy, because it was not at all. I mean, it was horrible up front. And I would say it was somewhat, I wouldn't say all luck, because I mean, I was looking under the right rocks. It's just, you know, what order and how quickly do you get to every one of those? And listen,
how many maggots come out when you lift the rock, right?
Right. And I'm competitive. So there is part of me that is just like, I really enjoy growing sales more than anything else. I mean, it's fun. And saying you have the biggest company or whatever, I think that sounds fun too. But I also have to remember there is going to be commitment. Like if we grow to $100 million in sales, like that is going to consume probably a lot of my time. And I have to start balancing, because as I get older, it's like when you turn 40, you really like something flips in your head. You're like, I'm half dead at this point. So, you know,
you were doing that when you're in your 30s, by the way, too.
Right.
you got, this is why like the time component of those three, I think you've got hypersensitivity too, which is awesome, because like but that means get shit done, right?
Yeah. Right.
You got urgency behind it.
Yeah. I mean, and I actually enjoy the hustle and I enjoy the problem solving, but there is a point where it's like, man, is this really worth all of this headache too? And I have this very, you know, conflicting viewpoint of, I like the competition, I like to win, but then I'm also very much like, I also like to be like, nothing can disrupt my life. So I'm a very like low debt person. I like Dave Ramsey. I like not having debt on my house. I just don't want to worry about things. I like to be able to go on a trip and not worry about how much things cost, right? Like that's really important to me. So it's conflicting, right? Because as I take on higher risk stuff, it may disrupt some of those things.
Well, and like as you think about what you're about to describe of how you're building the business, if you want to go on a vacation, let's say, I mean, nowadays, I mean, you can't go to Wisconsin and an Airbnb for 10 grand or less than 10 grand. But like, so let's say it's tens of thousands of dollars, hypothetically. You need to be able to afford it, first of all, financially. And you need to make sure that your freaking people aren't calling you because they can't find inventory and they can't drop ship stuff, or the Facebook ads broke. And by the way, Fritz, blah, 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 all those different things. So it's the time and building the operations to allow you to enjoy the vacation that you also have to spend the money for.
Yeah. And like just straight transparency. Like, I don't think there's ever been one day where I haven't logged in and looked at some amount of things, so like, yeah, there is. And so I like to be in the know, and maybe it's just me, it's bad habit.
I think that's fair. No, don't you think that's fair, Fritz? Cause like, if you think about the group that we're in my clients, like most people like the hustle, but they just don't want to be needed. They want to be able to like look at it and talk to people that they're delegating to, but not be the one that's doing it necessarily.
Right. Yes. Which actually ties into the challenges of you really trying to independently get your company to work. It's so like, yes, that's perfectly said. I like knowing what's going on. I like being involved. I don't want to be some like dinosaur, at least at this point, that just is so out of touch with my company. I'd like to at least, go to conferences, speak to other people, know
And
what
you're competitive too. So it's part of your identity, right? Like it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, what else am I going to do? I'm going to sit home and play video games with no stakes. Like that is not nearly as interesting as running a Shopify store. So, like as this all evolved, it was just like, okay, I know what I need personally, and now let's try to realign with, okay, how can we get there? And that's where I'm just like, okay, we don't need to grow sales. In fact, if we maintain, or like I said, even decrease and focus on profitability, we should be able to hit these goals. And if not, then those are the real good issues that I want to.
Let's get to like the actual planning that you've done. But let's start with what I think of the planning piece. Like it's one of the first dominoes, I think. What does Fritz want to be doing with his time? And then can you afford to hire other people without impacting your income? Right? Because that's the first bottleneck that everybody that you and I know struggle with. I mean, even if you got a high 7-figure, 8-figure business, I mean, like, it's like, okay, well, great. If I'm making 250 or 300, and all of a sudden I got to hire all these people, where's my income coming from? I mean, and that's like that's the perpetual balance. And so I've watched you, who I mean, I brag about you, Fritz. Like, I mean, you're one of the most brilliant online e-commerce marketers I've met. And like watching you, so not only are you the integrator so often, but you're also the CMO. And I struggle with this, like, I'm the only one that can do it mindset. Like, I think that there's a lot of things that we as owner operators, for the strategy, the culture, like that's really important. That is really difficult to decouple, but like you are super technical and smart on the CMO, e-commerce ads, funnel shit. And you were the integrator, and you've hired both of those people in the last couple of years.
Right. And like, just to be clear, like there was a point where I was the visionary director of revenue, and I was the marketing manager, and I was like running campaigns. So like I was still sending out emails like 3-4 years ago. It wasn't not probably 3 years ago. So, and yes, it was in my mind that it is not a replaceable job, because I was like, well, who's going to be able to do all this stuff? And like, it's hard to find people. There's so many fake online sales marketing people out there that talk a big game and they literally know nothing, and they're expensive. So I really took a step back and was like, okay, I can't expect somebody to do like 4 of these jobs, but I can expect somebody to do, like, I can hire someone to do email marketing, right? So I started with like breaking it out to be like, okay, and I hired someone overseas, so it wasn't even that as expensive a position, and that was a straight time for dollars, right?
And even all these positions, it wasn't a first, a home run on the first up to bat.
Oh, I mean, we are on our 3rd email marketer since I stopped doing that right now. So yes, no, we've gone through definitely, but just not doing the email marketing freed up like 1 full day a week, and the value I was creating. Well, I wouldn't even say the value. Like, I did not have enough time to adequately do email marketing. When you're like, okay, I have to send out 2 emails today and I have an hour to do it. And there was no chat GPT. There was no, like, right. Like, I'm like, we got to get moving and I got to go quick. And so it was just kind of like, get something out. It was working, but it wasn't what it should have been. Right. So like that was phase 1. And then literally it's just putting the time in to figure out, okay, what is the marketing team's job? And it's not really sales, it's acquisition of leads and awareness. So just find a person to do that. And, maybe they'll get some responsibilities with the sales, obviously, but that you can find, right? If you have to find someone that is going to drive sales and run marketing and have to be an expert at a lot of things, it just, you shrink your pool of people.
Yeah. And like when I think about these multiple positions, and you've gone through a couple presidents since we've known each other. And then you've gone through, I don't know how many CMOs, if you're like, because let me back up. Like, what I've watched you do is say, Jimmy Fritz needs to make this much money each year. And then you're building the operations. And then you said, okay, well, where am I spending my time? And then you started, you started chipping away at those things that are taking up your time, but you were managing your time and the cash flow dynamic. And we'll talk about how you saw that information in the financials, but like I watched you then go through and say, like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like this bullshit is worth the hard work because I can manage my time. I'm buying back my time and maintaining my income if I'm doing these things. So going through 3 email marketers or a couple presidents, I watched you have this mindset of I'm not going back. I'm just going to keep plowing forward. And then and that took you a long time to, get to the point where it's like, okay, things are kind of working here. But what I've watched you do is when every time that you bought more time back, you had time to think, which then made your decision making better.
Yeah. And like, it's like, I don't know, like I'm stressing out about 2025 now, right? It's like because it's like I've hired people and they've taken on responsibilities and I've had cash, but then it's like sales are tough. People's credit cards are maxed out. Like there's not the boom of weddings there were like 2-3 years ago. So, there's always things that are getting thrown at you too. It's not like, oh, this person you hired, they didn't work out. You just go get another person, right? Like usually if someone doesn't work out, there's a lot of other trailing problems that occurred with it. And
yeah, but like, don't you think, but like you're now spending time thinking about what to do about the credit cards. And then like you're thinking strategically, right. You're not like, when I say you're not going back into like, well, because it's going to be hard in 2025, Jimmy Fritz is now doing email marketing again.
No, right.
Like that's what I mean. Like you're moving forward.
Yes.
And elevating your thinking to manage the machine.
Yes.
And because at the end of the day, Fritz, you and I mean, how many years we've been watching people? I mean, it's a capital allocator. If you're going to own a wedding retail and a wedding e-commerce business as an asset, and that's tied to your free cash flow and your wealth, you're going to be thinking about like what's going on in the economic environment to make sure that like I don't lose this shit because you want your free cash flow and your wealth.
Yeah, and something I don't do as much as I should have. I always like to look at like my old issue lists of things that I'm frustrated with, and I'm like, well, all those have been solved 5 years ago, thank God. So to be clear, when I'm saying I'm stressing out about 2025, that was probably like standard operation when I was frustrated 7-8 years ago. And so things have progressed. It just never feels great. Like there's always a certain amount, no amount of sales or things always, like the stress just changes. I feel like it's, as entrepreneurs especially, we're never really happy with our current state. If you told Jimmy Fritz 10 years ago, this would be my life today, I would be like completely thrilled. And here I am, and I'm still like, it's so frustrating because you still feel that anxiety of like, well, what if this happens or what if that happens? And you constantly have to be in your head telling yourself like, you're just playing the worst case scenario out. And like, it's not going to be that bad. And so just come up with a solution. And that's
where having the machine, it's like the way you and I talk about it in our personal time. It's like, it's a playground. We're just having fun, right? Like if the time and cash flow dynamic is there and you know that you're slowly growing wealth, it's just the game of life as an entrepreneur, right? And like, what else, back to your point, are you going to be sitting playing video games, smoking some meat in the backyard? I'd be like, no, there's other, like, this is it. But you're putting the anxiety into context. And then you're saying, well, what back to like, because I've watched over, I mean, your mindset is what's the big worst case scenario, the risk. And if you contextualize that risk, your anxiety actually goes, proverbially your anxiety goes down, right? You're saying, well, like, yeah, back to like, I mean, the only reason, Senior and Lois stepped out is because like they can't screw it up anymore. And so like you're contextualizing those stresses. And I've watched you now say, okay, well, and let's talk about how you get into the mechanics of planning and what you've done and how it's different than just doing an annual planning for EOS, where like you've been taking the Independence by Design framework and saying, okay, well, your goals are going into the planning, right? Your time, cash flow, and wealth goals. Then you're rolling those into the financials. Then you're working on tying those financials to value growth strategies and the EOS. So that way you can be elevating yourself into the ownership position, but you don't have to always be there isolated, right? You're balancing the two, but like the mechanics that you're working on, I think are next level. It's not like, I struggle for it because, so many times, when we're in our group conversations, like, it's not going to be perfect ever. It's just like working out, right? Like you're just building a routine, but you're working on the right shit and you have the information.
Yeah, well, and that's true. It never feels, again, it's like everything though. I'm saying it's like it never feels like it's easy when you're doing it, but when you look back, things have gotten quite a bit better. And so my problem with EOS isn't that it isn't a great execution tool, because it's great about getting stuff done. It's you spend a lot of time focusing on issues and rocks, and it's like, but what issue are we tackling and why are we tackling that issue? And we're projecting 9 figures. Okay, how are we going to get to 9? How much capital do we need to get to 9 figures, right? Like it's stuff like that isn't really discussed. I think because a lot of times it's probably a small business jumping into EOS, and there's probably so many operational problems, and the owner's working too.
A lot of low hanging fruit.
It's like, yeah, let's just clean all that up first. Totally get that. Like, right? Like, how about you have quarterly meetings with people and have like expectations, and like that's just like 101. But I mean, I know a lot of businesses don't do it, and you can see when you sit in like a peer group or something, and someone's running EOS versus they're not. Like how they talk, how they think is a lot more organized. So I was like, okay, well, things are working better, but yeah, it's like who's accountable to all of these numbers? And the part that I just have found this pretty consistently with the leading indicators of EOS is they do help project the financial statement, but the stuff will go in red, and like we don't do anything about it. And I'm always,
what do you mean that? What do you? I want to keep going, but like, what do you mean that they do help you project the financial statement? So walk through like mechanically what were you doing and what are you doing now, like as it relates to like your planning? Like,
okay, so let's just keep it super simple for our retail store, right? We need to spend marketing money to get appointments in the store, and then there needs to be a closing ratio of the appointment. There needs to be an average order value of the appointment, and there needs to be, effectively though, that's going to drive your deposits, right? But there's discounting, there's labor, there's all sorts of other things that go into this. So we're tracking that on a scorecard metric, right? We're like, how many appointments do we have this month, and how does it compare to last year? And what's our closing ratio, and how does it compare to last year? But like, there's a lot of variables that just don't always go to the financial statement, and the accountability on the financial statement seems different than sometimes on some of these leading indicators. So like, hey, I can sell a lot more dresses. I'll just give them away for half off, right? That can make things look better on paper, but then really they're not. And then you start getting into
for clarifications of words here. So like, if you're just looking at the EOS KPIs and not the financials,
yes,
you're looking at things that might be better. But back to, I think you maybe inverse. It's like the financials don't lie.
The financials are the source of truth.
Right.
But it's kind of overlooked in EOS because it's such a lagging indicator. And I get it. Like, you don't maybe get your financial statement 2 weeks till after the end of the month. But like, that is the scorecard. That is what actually matters, because that's
what happened.
Yeah, right. That I'm going to determine if I have a distribution, if we've been profitable or not, off of a financial statement, not off of my scorecard in EOS. And so I would disproportionately spend a lot of time on the score or on the financial statement. My CFO looks at the financial statement. We would talk about it, but I mean, there wasn't accurate. There wasn't really good accountability, because everybody's looking at these leading indicators that sometimes don't matter. And that's, I think, the frustration with it.
And you've now threaded the needle completely to, let me know if I'm on track or off track with how I've seen like what this is like revenue. So you're spending marketing in ads. Then there's depending whether it's Kennedy Blue or the retail. So if it's the retail, it's appointment. If it's Kennedy Blue, it's the swatches, or maybe it's something different. But like, there's this conversion from ads to those KPIs that then projects and then shows how much revenue are you going to get in each of the geo codes, right? Yep. And so you're connecting it all the way down from to the marketing information and the forecasting, to the revenue, to the cost of goods, to the SG&A and overhead, rolls through the balance sheet into the cash flow statement, so you can see working capital, taxes, and distributions. I mean, like, you've truly threaded the needle completely from marketing dollars all the way down to what does this mean for distributions?
Yes. But what's challenging in why the financial statement's so important. I think, I don't know if this applies as much to like B2B, but with like B2C and consumer goods, it's becoming less about marketing hacks. Like 10 years ago, I could go find ways to get free traffic effectively. That was my superpower. Like now you just give Google or Facebook money. Like their companies, you know what they don't need to do is send you free traffic. You know what they want is $1 for your visitor, and then you figure out how to convert them, and you figure out, if you can't pay that $1, you don't get that customer anymore. More or less is the simple.
And if you can't pay that $1 and make money, net like free cash flow, EBITDA growth from that, then it's your fault.
So, and you know who doesn't care is Facebook, because if you don't figure that out, somebody else is, right? And so,
or willing to piss away money because they're just hoping it works,
right? And there's probably a lot of that too. So, like, does that mean you can't have better setups and worse setups? Sure, that occurs, but it's much more about whoever can spend the most amount of money to acquire the customer is going to have the most customers. And so now you start getting into all these things like inbound shipping rates and how do you get around as many customs or duties, and like there's so many things now that it's like, okay, this all has to be optimized. Where like 20 years ago, it really didn't matter. You just go to New York, you pick out a designer, you sell their dress, they handle all that, they have a ton of overhead. Everybody had overhead. Now it's like, how do I get a dress from some country like Indonesia to the United States, delivered in the customer's hands at the cheapest possible rate, so that
they like it and give you good reviews too.
Right, exactly. And keep in mind, I have startups that are selling bridesmaids dresses at half what we were selling them 10 years ago. Well, inflation is going up and costs of labor and shipping are going up. So it's a very complex formula. And you just aren't going to get that with 5 to 7 metrics on a scorecard for a company, which is EOS's like recommended, I think, scorecard number, I think 3 to 7. And so that's where I'm like, okay, sales isn't about me spending money on Facebook. That's the easy part. It's, do we convert that customer? Do we deliver the happy experience for that customer? And do we get it to them in the cheapest possible way? Well, to your point, they still liked it. And if you're not tracking all that stuff, then you start cutting marketing, or you start cutting something that's quick and easy because that's a big expense. Marketing is a huge expense for us, right?
Well, and what I love and what I want to unpack even more is like, you and I were talking about it. I don't remember if it was this week on our group call or last week, but like, if your mandate is Jimmy Fritz makes this much in distributions every month, everything has to work around that. It should be as important as paying down debt, because if a PE firm bought you, they'd slap the debt on anyways. So like, if all of that shit you just talked about is not possible and maintaining Jimmy Fritz's free cash flow, something's wrong.
Correct.
So then like every single decision or every single issue should pop out of that. Is it working capital and inventory? Is it, deposits? Is it pricing? Is it margin? Is it like the client acquisition costs? And I think so many times, I mean, back to like how you described Jim, Lois, and you at the beginning, is like, you guys were all last in order of like the profits. Now, if it's first in order, not only are you getting paid, but also all of the good decisions and are like, it's the right lens to see the issues from.
Well, there's two stakeholders for a business owner a lot of times, right? Them as an employee who's working in the company, who should get a salary, bonus, whatever that looks like. And then the person is the investor, to your point. And if I go to sell the company, some person or PE firm is going to take out debt to buy that. They need to be able to get cash from that to service the debt, unless it's a strategic purchase, right? And so it's not super complicated when you talk about it like that. But if you think about how like most people operate, they just are, everything's commingled and they're just hustling through it. And it's
and then they don't have any visibility. So like, let's talk about like, you had no visibility before, right? Which is where I saw all the conflict and all the confusion and all the stress and anxiety. Is like, you're just guessing versus saying, okay, if I have clarity on all the financials, and maybe that you can talk about what you have, like what is your financial setup now? But like, if you have clarity, then you can go figure out what levers to pull, right? And so it's not like, 5 KPIs that might be the leading indicators for EOS, but like, a set of financials is just that. You look at the income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement. Well, however many GL codes you have, I mean, the income statement is the goddamn scorecard, right? I mean, like, and that has to convert to free cash flow in the cash flow statement. And if it doesn't, it just doesn't, right? So like there is.
Yeah. And that's so true. And so like, and I ask, because like whenever I'm working on something, I just ask everybody. I'm like, hey, you're in a company. Do you track these things? Very few people. I mean, everybody tracks profit. Hopefully most people are tracking profit. I don't think most people track cash flow. I think they look at their bank account and they decide that's how cash flow is looking, which doesn't give you any idea really, because I mean, or you can estimate.
It's a way lagging indicator, not just like kind of. It's like way behind.
Right. So for us, that is where we have to get started, right? Like that is actually what matters. And we are fortunate that our cash flow, because we take deposits on stuff we're not paying for, is generally positive. We're busy in January. Quarter one and quarter two are our busiest months. So we have the advantage of not, having to we can take a lot of money at the beginning of the year versus a lot of companies take a lot of money at the end of the year.
But let's double click on that, because most people, especially if they get deposits where you're sitting on 7 figures in cash, can be even more lazy though, Fritz. And so,
yeah.
Because they're like, we got plenty of money. But like, what kind of bad behaviors come from that thinking?
Well, I mean, if you've ever seen a bridal shop go out of business, it's because of that scenario. They take a ton of money in quarter one and quarter two, but they overspend because they think they have a lot of cash. And then what happens is everybody picks up the dress. They have to pay the manufacturer for that dress. And then they're like, oh, I don't have money to pay the manufacturer.
Oh, no.
So then they get further and further behind on their bills, trying to catch up. And then they really are in kind of like a doom loop scenario. And then that's why they close shop and people are left without dresses because they didn't pay the manufacturer, even though they took the deposits from the customer.
So then like, talk about like in the financials, as I'm using my hands all over because I'm just picturing the spreadsheet that Pat's got for you guys, is like, you have the deposits, but you're not going and looking at the checking account. You're looking at the cash flow statement. Say you're looking at how all the income statement balance sheet ties to the cash flow statement to say, after all of that, I know I can get X amount of, 5 figures each month.
Yes.
So you're not looking at the bank account going like, I can pull 5 figures away from but you're looking at it completely different, right? I call it like the matrix. You see the matrix now.
Well, so and again, it's always a work in progress. And that's one of my initiatives for 2025 is just focusing on better projection of the numbers. I think that's still an area we're not as strong as we can be, but I take deposit today. That dress is going to ship in how many weeks? So that means that's when the revenue will be recognized, and that's when I will pay the manufacturer for the dress. So there's a pretty specific cash flow process, but we need to know how fast it's going to ship, and we need to know, their billing cycle, and there's all these nuances, like if it's shipping at the end of the month and the invoice shows up in a different month, how do we track that accurately? So we spend a lot of time on that because for me, it's just sleeping well at night, right? If we start shipping stuff sooner or something changes, I don't want to, right now, actually, we ship stuff faster. It disproportionately makes financial statements look good until that catches up. And it's like, oh, well, this month is going to look way down in the future because our Black Friday stuff is shipping in December versus January. So that means 2025 will look different this year because of that.
I mean, all of your, I just think about how clearly you articulated a situation and then how you find the information, right? Like instead of wondering, this is where Fritz, how long we've known each other, man. And me, I don't think either of us were sitting in Vegas at, what's that bar you love? The one with the, it's like the Hooter. it's like the Hooters of,
Twin Peaks.
Twin Peaks. And I don't think either of us were like, I can't wait to be a financial engineer. When we were there 8 years ago, what you and I were talking about was what the hell we got to do to be free for the rest of our life. And all the anxiety and all the stress that you and I have, we're constantly managing for our own lives. You just articulated clearly and the answers are in the freaking financials. So it's the way of a peace of mind. I don't know, man.
It's always there. In Vegas for Rhodium, I met with a super smart Facebook ads guy. And I mean, the guy, I can't afford him. Let's put it that way. But he sat down with me and he's like, well, why don't you do this, this, and this? And I gave him 3 reasons why I couldn't. I'm like, well, I don't know this. I don't know that. And he's like, well, can't you just go figure it out? And I'm like, well, yeah, I suppose I could. And he's like, well, just go to the room and figure it out. I literally went to the room, spent like 2 hours, got all the answers, came back, and he's like, well, there's your answer. Run the ads like that. And it was like, yep, that was pretty simple. And so I think sometimes it's like it sounds more complex than it requires. It just really requires your discipline to sit down and do the work that needs to be done. It's not like this is that complicated of stuff I'm talking about, but like how many people don't have accurate financials or know this information? I'd say most businesses.
Let's talk, Fritz, about the specific work that you've done to get this information, because and like let's not hold back from the level of detail and the mechanics. And so I'll put a container around this, because I just had Tracy Beck on the podcast where we spent an hour and 45 minutes talking about the actual 3-statement file. So that's the podcast episode right before you. And you've got Pat Hobby, who, like, I've always joked around, like, you should lock him in a basement because, like, you're the luckiest. Because, like, I mean, what he has done from the 3-statement model, that's where I get a lot of this foundational information. It's like, this is the source of truth, and this is how it works, regardless of our opinions. But there's a way that these financials need to be connected, and there's certain things that we need to do. If Jimmy Fritz wants to know how much cash will be in the checking account and why in the middle of 2026, we have to do a certain set of steps, right? Because how you started this was like, it takes the discipline, but like, people will be like, well, what discipline? Is it just budgeting? And like, I know in the past, you used to take last year's financials, add 5 or 10%, divide by 12. But it's like, you even said fourth quarter is your busiest year for deposits and sale. And like, and you have this whole mismatch of like when you actually get the money versus when you sell. So like, there was no ability to have the visibility into what cash will you have in the middle of next year for ownership if you just straight line the P&L and the income statement. So what I talk about for like the actual discipline is take and go, and this is where I got this from Pat too, from years ago, is month by month by month, revenue line by revenue line, and cost of goods line by cost of goods line, and overhead line by overhead line, and use your brain to determine what do you think you're going to sell and why in each of those months, with a rough guess on how, like, based on your marketing conversions and your whatever information you can pull from to figure out how those revenue lines are going to be generated. It all ripples through that, but like, you're taking thought processes based on your, the retail and Kennedy Blue, the different types of seasons that you guys work with, Black Friday, all that shit. And that has to then be done, that thought process, to then roll all the way through to then in your balance sheet and your cash flow statement, say like, when and how are these things shipping and all that shit. So I'm just saying this because there's like, when you say it's not that complicated and it just takes discipline, it's like, maybe walk us through how you did the month by month budget. And because the only reason we do this is to get an understanding of what kind of cash you'll have. Does that help with a container? Because I've watched you evolve how you've done that over the years.
Yeah. So a couple of things, right? So one, yes, you have to have a 3-statement model that's accurate, and you have to project the cash and you have to project the P&L. Like, those are the two things. And so when you have the leading indicator, and this is, again, one of my complaints with EOS is it makes sense, right? One person can own a number, but how do you do like sales, right? So if my marketing, product manager, and customer service team are all the people driving sales, then really if I'm the integrator and they report to me, then I'm technically responsible for sales. The problem is I don't do things to drive sales. I'm not sending the emails out anymore, right? I'm not doing the activity. So I have to rely on those 3 individuals to forecast their metrics so that, like, the sales will happen and sales will occur. Well, the problem with, like I said, the leading indicators is we don't trust all of the metrics, because they may tell us what's kind of happening, but we don't know how it aligns with the financial statement. Well, then I got 3 people doing things that may or may not help. And ultimately I'm responsible for it. So if sales are off, then it's like, well, Jimmy, you're in charge of sales. So that means you got to now work to figure it out, which is me going back to those people being like, well, what did you forecast? Right. And why are your things wrong? So when we built out the 3-statement model, I said, here's what I want from top line. And honestly, I didn't even care. I'm like, obviously it's going to be comparable to what we have been doing, but forecast 30% down, forecast 10% up. Let's just come up with some models. And then,
but it's not on the whole year, it's per month, right? Like, you're not just
it's month to month. But now I'm like, okay, product manager, you need to forecast how many units of each product we're going to sell. And I get that's a really difficult thing. And I'm like, listen, it can change over time, but can you predict next month or the month after that with the margin and whatnot? And so
and you're doing that based on the sales though, right? You're saying like, so you're like, you're everything's tied together. Like everything starts with those marketing activities to like forecast out with what percentage accuracy that revenue is going to land on the different revenue lines.
yes.
Right. And then you're just back, like, I mean, you're just going into it. So like, how did you guys, so back to you. So you started with sales and the different people forecasting out the sales. So like, walk us through how the 3-statement model was built for you guys.
So, I mean, it's a pretty typical financial, like, you probably start with the P&L first, right? And you're saying, okay, here's all of our products that we're planning. So how it's built out is it has this unit sales by category, right? So let's just take bridesmaids dresses as a category. We're going to sell 1,000 units this month. Then the deposit would hit in January. We would forecast the shipping to be, let's just say 2 months from now. So the revenue will hit that month. The expense will hit that month. The margin will be X. The discounts will be Y. The labor will be Z. And like, it all builds off of that. So you do have to know like approximately when things are going to ship. But that it's all needed for business. Like the more I can predict how accurate something ships, the better I can tell the customer an estimated delivery date. So, those are the kind
and you went like, how did you get that information? And by the way, when you said you're gonna ship a 1,000, you have marketing leading indicators that gave you that $1,000 or that 1,000 units, right?
Right. You can go back 6 months and we spent marketing dollars to drive that. So like that is the hard part with like our industry. And I'm sure it's a lot of industries. Like there's everything. Like we have to acquire a bride who just got engaged, who may not buy something from us for 6 months. And then I don't recognize revenue to the dress ship. So that's now another 2 months. So it's like I have to spend, and it's not like a couple $100. It's tens of thousands of dollars a month in Facebook and Google ads to drive these leads who then we have to nurture and convince that are good. And like our competitor can run a sale and sell them cheaper than us and then pull off of our conversion rate. And there's so many variables. So, but at the end of the day, someone needs to be responsible for all that. No question, right?
Like when you say all that, it's that whole journey you just said. So give it to us again. So it's the 1,000 units. Then because like, and you spent the marketing material, the marketing so you're spending 10 grand a day, and it takes months to acquire that person. So you're tracking how that person, all that data tracks that and connects it to those 1,000, right? So you're not just like you got the 1,000, and then walk us through that essentially you have the customer journey all the way through shipment, but that then reconciles with every piece of the financial statements.
Right. So we know the financial statement 2 weeks after the end of the month is going to be right. It's how accurately can we predict that and how far can we go out? And when we struggle to predict 1 month out, it's like, well, how do you build a budget 12 months out? Or what would be ideal for me is an 18-month or 24-month because of this long buying cycle. And because we can't do that, that's the issue. Why can't we predict it? And then you start digging in. So as I start assigning these responsibilities, I just created a 3-step process for the managers. I said, okay, you're on my leadership team. I will just take my product manager. You forecast units. Now, you may not be 100% responsible for the unit sales. I get that. Marketing has to do things, customer service, like if you don't deliver it on time, there's problems. But by and large, you're the one researching the product. You're the one setting the pricing. You're the one that's should be talking to the customer and understanding what they want. So like they like the product or they don't to some extent. Now, if we're off on the forecast, it is that person's instead of it just becoming an issue or we wait till it hits the financial statement, then Jimmy brings it up and has to go talk to the manager about it. It's like, no, you are going to be now responsible for forecasting this. If it's off track, then you need to talk to whoever is also contributing to this and figure out who's done what. Marketing didn't send any emails out for this product. Okay, well, that's the issue. That's why we're off. Get that fixed and then reforecast for next month. And then let's get back on track. And then if nobody can figure it out, then it becomes an L10 issue list item that shows up on the leadership team level.
So, okay, I love it. I love where we're going because on our group call on Tuesday, there was a bunch of hemming and hawing about random things just end up on the L10 issues list because people just don't want to do shit. So it's just like everything becomes a rock or an issue instead of just normal day-to-day work
Yes.
for people. And you've actually, I think to quote you, is people just want to hire and invest in things to make their jobs easier, even though it might not generate free cash flow. But before we get to like,
well, and actually it could
maybe
even be more fundamentally worse than that, because if you're tracking these scorecard metrics that you don't know actually matter to deliver the financial outcomes you want, you might just be solving for something like that too. You might be like, hey, this scorecard metric, it's in the red, but if I pay $50,000 for this software, now it's in the green. But did the company, did the company make less or more money after the end of the day? That's what we are in business to do. And so I think it's more about, you need probably these leading indicators, but what does it impact for free cash flow or profit? And if someone can't answer that, then the issue is, then you need to figure out if it does or doesn't. Like, you can always go a step back.
The information, like, it's always, like, to your point, man, it's like, if we want to get max value when we ever want to sell, we need to answer all this shit anyways, right? Like, you need to answer this for a private equity firm, and like, why wouldn't you want to know the information? So the issue should always be, why don't you have the information? Yes. And once we have the information, what degree of accuracy are we on predicting it? And then if we're off on the prediction, why? And then that becomes a continuous improvement cycle of business. It's always trying to, increase the accuracy of the forecast and the future cash flows. But like, so like, it's the root of all, like, it's the first principle where everything deviates around, or is revolving around that. When I watch what it in your spirit, or in the spirit of trying to get more information, you had texted me and said, all right, I want, like, you dove back into the great game of business, because we were talking on one of our group calls, the income statement is the ultimate dashboard. And so like, walk us through, like, if you have the sales, COGS, and then overhead, how, like, because like that GL code result is like, someone did that. So like, walk us through like how you're creating ultimate responsibility based on your plan, and then how you're believing that's going to create the accuracy and continuous improvement and responsibility.
Well, one, I think if you start with like the source of truth, right? If we can all agree the financial statement is the right measurement, and we're agreeing that, okay, this is the distributions that we need to take out of the company, and this is how much profit we want to have and how much money we want to keep in the company, right? You can make decisions that are very tactical that everybody can agree with, hopefully. And so then it really just comes down to, how accurately can we predict all of these things? So to do that, that's where I needed to say, I'm going to assign these and it's like 15 GL codes. It's not like 100. It's not as, most.
And you have right, because you could have like 1,000 GL codes of different SKUs, this and that and the other thing, but you end up boiling it down to 15 or less.
Listen, credit card fees I don't like, but I'm not probably going to be able to do much about them. So it's a live with. As long as I'm using Shopify, then this is what their fee structure is, and that's what it is. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but I'm going to spend a lot of time about like the margin of the product, right? If we decide, it's very difficult in our industry when you have these companies that sell cheap stuff from China that is cheap junk, but looks nice on a model, and with AI you can clean it up. So they're selling a dress for $89. My dress is $130. We can drop our price to $89 and sell more, presumably. How does that impact the financial statement? Or are we better off selling fewer units and providing that customer service? And so the question isn't like, the customers will be, what'll go up? Net Promoter Score if we drop the price, because people are happy to get a cheap dress. But if we go out of business, not a good decision. So
our NPS is not 95%, but
yep. But like a lot of people make decisions based on that, because their worldview is what they're dealing with. And if you're in the store or whatever, and you're selling customers and they're coming in saying, hey, money is tight for Christmas. And it's like, but if you give me an extra 10% off, like maybe I'll close today. You have to understand how those financially all tie together. Maybe you do the 10% off, maybe you don't. But if you don't know, then you're just guessing, and then you're just waiting to see what happens at the end of the year. And that's where all the anxiety comes from. So for me, it's like, I expect us to be very bad at guessing. And then the issues are, why are we bad at guessing? And solve those issues. And as we,
that's awesome, dude.
Get better at it, like, because I mean, if everybody could predict with 99% accuracy these 15 GL codes, and we were showing whether the profit was 3% or 15%, I'm like, well, we're not losing money. I can plan my life around that. When you're like, maybe we'll be 15 or maybe we're -4, well, that's a big, like, that's a
expectation. It's the expectation gap, dude. Because like, and I think about that's where all of our stress and happiness and anxiety lies, is the gap between expectations and reality, right? Because like the expectations are you need a certain amount of free cash flow, and that's why like it breeds all these best behaviors from that. How did you say it again? Say it again. It's like our goal is to predict. Like we expect to be bad at guessing, but all of the issues should arise from how do we get better at guessing?
Yes, I mean by and large. So it's like if we don't know how to if we don't know why dresses are selling or we forecasted it wrong, it's like, okay, well, why not? And it's gonna be like, well, we don't know. It's like, well, great. Sounds like a good rock to start discovering what are the activities that have changed or leading indicators. But that's like back to this whole thing. Like that isn't my job to tell everybody what their leading indicators should be. My job is to provide a clean financial statement that's normalized. So if I go and buy a car or do something personal that they don't have control over, that I can take that out and I can say, this is the scorecard we all agree on. And, Jimmy as the investor needs X and Jimmy as the employee is supposed to deliver Y. And really the integrator's job is to hire the right people to manage those GL codes, create the leading indicators so that they can better predict it. So then then everything can roll down from there. And if we can't predict it, then that's where all the anxiety comes from.
Well, and what was your, the spirit of the text message you'd sent me was like, if your job is not to do other people's job or even to come up with the rocks, which I think a lot, if you think about the group, my client group, Fritz, I mean, how many people's anxiety is stemmed from they think they're supposed to be the one that's always seeing around every single corner, and there's so much stress that's related to that. But if you flip it, and that's Joel Trammell, who was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, it's like we're flipping that. We're like, every decision shouldn't go through you and you shouldn't be responsible for every decision. It's to understand how all of that data is tying to the future. Right. And then how to drive those decisions down, and the decisions are down. And then the things that pop up is all about the accuracy of organizing the entire set of incomes, the income balance sheet and cash flow statement towards that future goal and picture. And then how to delegate the resources. And you're doing that by connecting everyone's activities to their geocodes. And so you had said in the text message, like, it's not my job to do this anymore. And I'm now going to, if people can't, or I don't know how you word it, like it's all about hiring high performers that can do that.
Yeah.
But you've now got a lens of like what type of people you need, because the responsibilities are very clear. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Like, and listen, I have created a certain culture of saving the day and helping people out. Like I think it's not uncommon, right? Because like business owners will just sit and work. Like I will work till 2 a.m. if that's what I have to. And it's not even, I enjoy some part of that. The problem is I'm constantly also putting a culture together where if there's an issue, then it's like, well, we have to go ask Jimmy how to solve it. Because, I don't want to do that. I can't do that, to be quite honest with you. Like my guess is if you go to these huge companies, the CEO is probably the least important person outside of they hire the right people and they're doing the press releases and maybe some of the visionary work. So it's like that is where I think like even from a career development, that was my rock this quarter, was to work on a career development. And our facilitator had one that was like integrator phase 1, integrator phase 2, integrator phase 3. Here's my expectations. And I'm sitting there being like, if you're having to do 1, 2, 3 for your integrator, I think you've already missed the boat. I feel like when you hire the integrator, you should be saying, here is the scorecard that matters for me, which would be free cash flow and normalized EBITDA. So I need you to deliver that metric. You have these 6 direct reports. You need to hire and coach those people to do the right job. And they should come to you with, these are the resources or training or things I need to do a better job. And then then it's your decision is like, okay, well, where do we allocate budget?
Yeah, it's Fritz, like you'll have to check out, and same thing with the audience. Joel Trammell was back on the podcast. You're gonna love it. It's he's created the chief executive operating system, and so he's like like the master of understanding what does the CEO do and how does the CEO have a relationship with the ownership. And we were talking about it because he scaled and sold a couple companies. You would literally freaking love it. And because we were talking about the CEO technically, which call it the integrator, CEO president. I mean, the integrator visionary shit like really confuses a lot of people. I mean, when you have an income statement, the CEO is responsible for sales, operations, and overhead, and the CEO should have an executive on each one of those spots, which actually correlate directly with if you think about this, Fritz, I don't know if you and I've talked about this, but you have sales, ops, service, production, or whatever you want to call it, and then overhead. And those are the three functions of EOS. And those are the three buckets of the income statement.
Yeah, right.
And then the actual CEO should be on top of that with no tasks list because they're using the people in each function to do the work. So the only goal of the CEO should be to drive those people towards free cash flow.
Yes.
Like in that CEO's job is to do that for the ownership.
Yes, correct.
And so when I was talking to Joel about this, you'd love this. I go, because he goes, yeah, when I'm sitting on as a shareholder, I'm sitting on the beach and someone calls me up, I do not want to talk about the customer acquisition process. It's literally on track or off track. And if you're off track, what the hell are you going to do about it?
Yes.
And
that's right? True. But I think that is the part where you have to be crystal clear of I know you aren't 100% responsible for every GL code, but you are the most responsible and you have the most control over it. And we have this thing called meetings and collaboration that you can work with those people to solve it. It's not a problem until you can't agree or you can't solve it. And then we have to go back and look at it from a holistic view of if sales are going to be off by 10%, what does that mean for every other department? Because either we make less money now or we make budget cuts. And as the CEO, then that's where you're probably having to make that decision. If you can't solve it, then there's other things that have to get adjusted.
Right. And what Joel was talking about with the CEO role too, is that person, just to be clear for everybody too, I'm not saying that picture that I just painted is perfect or but the shareholders, I don't get involved in Apple's operations and nor do you.
Yeah. Right.
And that's what a shareholder technically is. But as owner operators, I think there's this dynamic because Joel says that 90% of the CEO's job should be looking into the future to make sure that what you're doing, Fritz. I mean, you're the CEO. So technically it's the W-2 operations, but an owner operator of the companies that are around our size, I mean, you don't need a CEO that's just a CEO. You kind of got this balance of, of the owner operator. But if 90% of the CEO's job is looking to the future, it's doing what you're saying, which is making sure that all of the people tied to those GL codes are predicting the future for themselves and then reporting back to you to say, here's how this, but you're responsible for understanding how the big picture of the financials and the picture of the company all tie together. And you've done the work so that way, if it's off, you can keep double clicking and asking people, right? And you know how to you've got the bullshit meter, right?
Right. And I struggle with this because this is one of those things where it's I don't want to be doing other people's jobs or overstepping my boundaries. But a lot of really good CEOs of Apple and Tesla, they'll go on the production floor and be let me see what you're doing here. If you're saying that this issue can't be resolved, I think there is value where the CEO can come in from a not in the day-to-day perspective and be well, show me your process and let's see what's going on here and help them maybe see if they're off track or not seeing something.
No disagreement, man. Because what was it a couple weeks ago and you and I were laughing about, the thing about Elon is people with the whole data server move. Remember that? It's this is going to take a year and a half. And he's no, wrong. And they did it in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And I think that there is value in that. One, it's it shows he's on the ground. He'll get on his hands dirty to solve problems. And it also sets a culture, I believe, of high performing. Because yeah, it probably would take a lot of companies a year and a half to do what they did in a weekend or whatever it was. And I mean, the time discrepancy is so huge there that you're how much money are we spending if it takes us that long to do something that should take, a week or two? I think that's the part. Now, I would hope in most of our smaller companies, it's not like that. But, there is creep, there's cost creep that happens every year. We hire this person. We have to give raises because of inflation. And then other variables change. And how often are you going back and being hey, that person we hired 3 years ago, do we still need them at all? And, COVID that really got things cleaned up quick because it was you have to
For
cut
you
all
guys, there's a lot of people that took the free money and didn't do any of the hard work. I mean, honestly.
Yes. And, I'm glad we didn't, but out of fear, we did, and we made the hard cuts. But then it was like, okay, you could run way leaner. But, there is a point too, we were running so lean, profit was high, but you can see it's burnout of staff. So listen, I can't sit there and say everything's free cash flow. I mean, I don't want unhappy people because then they quit and I have unhappy customers. And so it's a complex formula.
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting, but like, I think it's not like, and I want to make sure that people are constantly not missing one of my points is it's not free cash flow isn't the only thing that matters. It's just understanding what the hell is the trade-off, right? Like it's like, and this is where I always push it back onto you or any of the clients in our calls is like, if you're going to, save the day and give people a discount or do this, you just know what the implications of that are. There's no wrong choice. It's the unexpected that comes from your decisions. That is what we're trying to avoid.
Right. And I think that's why it's so important to do all the work from like, what are you personally looking for? Because honestly, I think what ends up happening with most business owners is they get to a point where they make enough money to where they're comfortable and they don't want the problems and they want it. Nobody wants to run, I don't believe, or a lot of people don't want this like miserable place to work either. Right. Like, I know a ton of people who work corporate America and like in their 30s, they just can't wait to get out, but they're handcuffed in and they're stuck. And it's like, I don't want that culture at all. That's why I'm like, listen, if we sell less dresses, but our customers are happy and our staff's happy and we can make a reasonable profit to where I'm not creating anxiety, like that's a great scenario. I don't need 25% EBITDA or some ridiculously high number like that. That will come with a cost too. And so I think it's getting everybody aligned, but I think you also have to be on board with like the free cash flow is the number one. Like you have to be completely selfish about your distribution as an investor too, because if you're just giving up your investment continually to make everybody happy, then you're kind of running a charity essentially.
Yeah. And it's not, you can't sell it either. Cause you're like, that's truly stuck.
Well, you sell it to private equity for strategic purchase and then they'll let everybody go. And so
they have to pay the debt somehow. Like, it goes back to like, if the only way to do a handoff of a company, ESOP, family, like any buyout has debt included in it.
Yeah. Right.
Like you're going to do it. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I have great employees. What they're not going to do is work for free. And like, I don't expect them to. And, as an investor, if I'm just going to like stick my money in this thing and then maybe not even take a market salary in a lot of situations, like, I don't know. I mean, so I just work and employ a bunch of people. And then one day I have to figure it out back in when I'm 75 years old. Like that does not sound fantastic either. So, and I am not like personally, I don't have like Ferraris and expensive tastes. I'm like I like flying like first class and I like going to Vegas a few times a year, but I'm not even gambling and going crazy. So it's not like I live this lavish lifestyle. And it's hard even when you're living modest lifestyle to be able to have enough cash flow to pay for all of your life and your kids. And then you also are trying to save for, retirement. And it's not like I have a pension or some type of guaranteed income that's going to come in. It's like, this is my income or it's not when I'm 70 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're making all the decisions through, as we wrap up here, is through the lens of the time, cash flow, and wealth. It's a trade-off, right? Those are the constraints, and every decision you're working through is like, if I hire these people, I reduce my cash flow, but I might be growing my wealth, or like, you're just constantly going through that, and there's no right or wrong answer. It just has to do with your goals. Which, as we wrap up here, Fritz, any thoughts about like what are your goals? I mean, like, how do you want to, if you were listening into this and you heard this story, like, what would you want to know?
What my goal really, and so like I'm talking about this like I'm some expert. It's because I've spent like a year, 2, 3 trying to really work on scorecard.
It's been longer.
I'm saying like I've really been in the weeds on like figuring out who's accountable for what. And it's not like I ask a lot of smart people and you don't get like, there's not a silver bullet. So you have to really understand that you're going to put something together and it's probably not going to be perfect. So I have no idea if this is going to be it won't be the perfect plan. It will be the best plan I think I have had. And for me, it's not like I want people to be clear in what I need them to do. And I want the transparency, just like with EOS, to be like, if we're off track, this is the process in which you handle it. And if we're continually off track, okay, then that's a different conversation. But I think people will get on track once you set those expectations. And for me, like I like to work a lot, but I really don't want to be in crisis mode continually either. Like,
Well said.
if something doesn't sell, like I didn't design the product, I don't want to go back and figure out the process. I need you to do that and tell me what went wrong. And then if it's like, hey, it happened, right? Let's correct it moving forward, as long as, again, it's financially capable. But for me, it's about reduction of stress, which is crisis management or like cash flow problems are really the two big ones.
Well, and when I think about, as you, what the ultimate goal that I've seen you work towards is, if that time cash flow dynamic is in a healthy balance while you're growing wealth, whether you sell, don't sell. I mean, you got two companies here. It's optionality, right? Because you're focusing on the right thing as ownership with the time cash flow, with the operations, but then you're keeping your options open for whatever reason, right? I mean, it's not about selling. And that's like, it's always been like, if you think about over the last 10 years, Fritz, the hardest words to talk about, where it's just you're building an asset and the life that you want and keeping your options open. But because you understand all this stuff, you can play the game. I mean, how would you articulate that dynamic?
Well, okay, think about it like this, right? We invest our money in different things. And there are things that are predictable and there's things that are less predictable. Usually when they're unpredictable, there's probably more upside. And so for me, it's kind of like with a business, I feel like there's more upside with the business than sticking it in the S&P 500, let's just say. But there also comes a lot more risk. And I don't know, I don't know where I heard this, but it was like, in a 10-year period, you're going to have like 2 years where you can screw everything up and it's still just everything works. There's 2 years where like you do everything right and nothing works. And then the rest is kind of like, it's just.
I like that a lot, actually.
And I have no idea. I haven't tracked it year by year, but I sure feels like that. When things are going great, it's like, sweet, you're spending money, you're making stupid decisions, but like everything is just rolling in the right direction because of the economy or what have you. And so like, you want to be able, like, we all spend like it's the best year ever. There will be some type of financial crisis or some type of economic change or things that occur. And it's like, if you're not prepared and if you've not saved money, and like, what happens if people just stop getting married in the future? Like, I don't know, like there's definitely a trend towards fewer percentage of the population. So I need, like, I may only have 10 years to do this, right? And maybe it's a business I don't want. I just don't know. Maybe it goes the opposite direction too, but I would rather prepare for those scenarios than to just, plan like it's a great year every year.
Well, there's that. Well, but like, it's also, you're doing that while you own it. And like, what I think about Fritz is like you built all the operations and it's the continuous improvement, right? But like, by understanding valuations, and like you and I's discussions over the last damn near 10 years, if you decided like, hey, I want to offload one of these assets, you're not going to be learning about how valuations work or all this stuff. Like, you're going to be agile and anti-fragile to say, okay,
yeah,
but it'll be an economic decision, not like a panic, frustration, like all that stuff, which like, I don't know how to, it's so hard for me over the years to describe that.
I think if you're thinking like with the money in mind, you will adjust where if weddings or something changes, like maybe you sell something, maybe I'm selling skincare in 5 or 10 years, right? Maybe I'm not, but like,
I always think you should get into divorce services, man. The full life cycle. Like,
oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that quite, we're selling the magic, not the
funeral home is across the street. You have got the baby on. There was like in one little area on the block, you had like the full, like literally life cycle of a human being.
It was, we marry them, they bury them. That was the joke. But I guess my point is like the pivot would come, I think, with a well-run company. When COVID hit, like Pat was like, you got to go figure out something to sell online. We started selling robes online, which we didn't sell that many. And it became $1 million product business for us for like 2-3. And it was like, give Facebook $1 and you get 10 in sales. It was such an easy win. But then like Facebook algorithm changed, Apple iOS privacy changed. Like the robes became more of a commodity. Now we don't sell as many robes as we used to. So like you can sit there and continually live in the past, or you can understand what you're trying to accomplish. And like we just cut it because, well, we sell them, but we don't spend the money we did.
Yeah.
And then we just have to have a new source of income or a new source to generate that profit.
Well, and it's like back to as we wrap it, the game you're playing is the ownership game, is what the way I've tried to figure out how to articulate it, because you're keeping optionality up. You're going, okay, what are we doing with e-commerce? What are we doing with, retail? It's capital allocator, but strategic operating capital allocator. I don't know how to, like, it's a different type of game than just this linear EOS revenue. And the only way I've been able to describe it, Fritz, is the Matrix, right? Like you got that red pill and you're just playing a different game every day.
I mean, we kind of, it's funny because my parents actually like indirectly played that game for the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They created a business. They worked 1 million hours. They took what cash flow they had. They bought real estate. The real estate rented back. In the time they were like, hey, Florida, there's these condos on the beach for $70,000. It seems like a low price. So like that was the reason they were financially free, is because the real estate alone could support their lifestyle. And that wasn't like an intentional thing, I think, where they like planned it out. I think it was like, well, we have extra money. Let's just invest it in this thing versus sitting in the bank. And like you and I, more with Bitcoin now, right? But I wouldn't mind investing in real estate and stuff at some point. So it's like, you're just creating a bigger asset. And like, we don't even think of the real estate as a company, even though it is, that generates profit and income, because it's just a commingled thing with like, the wedding shop in some cases. But, the Florida real estate was just a separate company. And honestly,
it's back to the asset, but back to it's the asset out in capital allocation. And you've done the hard work to understand the valuations and how companies are valued. So Kennedy Blue and Wedding Shop, what your opportunity costs are of keeping them, selling them, just like someone does with real estate, because of how much you've learned about this stuff, right, which allows you to then look at keep or sell as an investor, not just like the job. I guess that's what I mean by the matrix. Like it's like the game has changed, and it's free cash flowing entities, maybe stuff like Bitcoin, real estate, whatever it is, but it's the wealth game and the cash flow game has changed, and you've leaned into the hard work to become aware of how that game is played.
Yeah. Well, we had rental properties that we had. Perfect example. My dad's like, well, the renter's really great. And I'm like, well, when I break out the financial statement on this unit, it actually loses money. So now as a business, do you want to just keep a happy renter and lose money, or do you want to raise rent to market rates, or do you want to sell it? Like those are your decision trees. And again, it was being done. It's just, I think, being a lot more intentional about what is the outcome. If you buy the real estate, if you buy the new business, like what outcome are you creating with that?
Or if you invest in the Wedding Shop and Kennedy Blue into these strategies, so your rocks, you're investing in them.
Yes.
I mean, that's what you're doing, right? We go back to as like the rocks with EOS, you're picking things that says after the free cash flow, working capital, and taxes, we're going to invest X amount into these companies, and you expect it to generate more free cash flow. Otherwise, why doing it, right?
So this will happen this June every year is, okay, I can start spending money in June when our cash flow is low to generate a lead that will purchase, their wedding will be a year from that date, or I can pull that money out and buy a condo or buy Bitcoin or put in a bond. You pick whatever you want to make your decision tree here, but that's the question. So if the company can't predict what they're going to do with that lead, or they don't know, it's like, well, then me as an investor has to decide what risk do I want to take? Because I know if I go buy a duplex, and I'll get a certain percentage rate of return on it, and it's but boring, but it works, right? If I'm saying, okay, I get to spend this money on leads, and you can't tell me if they're going to convert, little nervous about doing that, right? Like,
well, and that's what it means to be an investor and capital allocator, right? And like the data and everything we've discussed in this conversation allows you to have better clarity on that trade-off decision, and knowing what you want and what is the risk and what you want, and the education you've given yourself allows you to make that decision.
But it comes back to then how well do you predict the unit, right? How well do you predict the close? Like if you can't predict that, then the issue is you can't predict the financial statement, which then makes it hard for me as an investor to decide if we're going to allocate money. Because if you're my real estate investor, you can be like, hey, Jimmy, I'll go buy you a condo and this is how much money you're going to make on it. We got 100 other units that do this already.
I know. And the risk-free rate potentially, when I say potentially without going down, is the 30% compound annual growth rate for Bitcoin as the risk-free rate.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, like there's, I mean, I think that becomes an actual decision potentially for people. I mean, oh, it's fascinating, dude. Isn't it funny? Like you and I have over the years that we put into this effort and the effort we put into this, like how many people are just making shit up.
Oh man. Well, so, from my marketing background, and I was a total sucker for every single marketing online course that ever existed. I think I bought them all. And I would continually watch these because you're always chasing after it. And it's like, nobody knows what they're talking about. They're literally they're just making stuff up. And they're charging $2,000 and they're selling, presumably, some of them, because everybody's just looking for the answer. And I'm like, there's just not that many people that have actually done it. Because it's like, to my point is like, if you can't sell a product, then like you're selling your marketing. So I'm just like, I don't. It's hard.
I know those those who consult can't. And it's even then like that's on the marketing shit. But then, and I've been doing that on the business, growth and exit, whatever the hell you want to call it. And like, so you got, Ryan Dice and those guys who I've got scalable.co or whatever it is, where they're telling people how to scale their company and how to buy things. It's like, and they sold the private equity and the effing private equity firm just shut down traffic and conversion.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, there's your, like, so that's the outcome. And I'm so fucking sick and tired of everybody explaining how easy it is. It's like,
easy.
What you did. Yeah, right.
Trust me. I've read Tim at the 4-Hour Work. I've read every one of those books. I've tried to create.
There's no silver bullet. Yep.
No, probably like what you're doing, where you acquire years and years and years of knowledge and expertise. And like, you read, I don't know how many books you read a year, 50?
It's not that much anymore, but it's
a lot. I mean, you're well educated. And like, then you build this in knowledge base and then you can go like charge it. And it's always convenient to be able to look at like, wow, man, look at how successful, the business is now. That must be nice. It's like, well, no, like my mom was sleeping on the floor. Like, I know you've had your ups and downs over the years. Like, it's not like you see the outcome now and you're just like, okay, I want this. It's like, well, yeah, we have to put the time in. So it's gonna
yeah, but like, I agree with you on that. But like, what happens is, and I'm so sick and tired of this shit online, is we only see what they choose to describe as the outcome. Like, so did this, and I did this, and it's like, well, like, did you go through the full life cycle of like, like whether it's the people that sell the PE, and like, I mean, the problem that I had with the podcast in the early years, Fritz, is like, they talk about this glamorous shit. Same thing as the best places to work, or like the Inc. 5000. It's like, oh wait, you sold this and you put it on your LinkedIn resume and now you're on stage, and it's like complete disaster. Private equity firm, it went belly up. There was no free cash flow, and then you just got to hop around and pretend that it was great. And I'm just so sick and tired of that shit.
I hate when people are always telling me like, good job. I'm just not. I hate taking credit for things. And so whenever I would present to people, I'm always like, listen, I'm going to just tell you straight how it is. Like, maybe I'm not that smart. Maybe there's smarter people that have figured it out. I'm sure that's the case. But I'm like, by and large, most entrepreneurs have a high tolerance of ability to just deal with a lot of shit and keep pushing through. And there's maybe it's like they like it, or I don't know what causes it, but like, I'm like, that's it. Most of the, I mean, I got C's. I have my report cards. My parents just brought them.
I just found mine too.
I'm like, well, I definitely wasn't. When I give my kids a hard time about their grades, I need to reflect that. For me, it was like, C's get degrees, and if I can get this done efficiently, that's great. So I wasn't like some astute financial mind, like at all. Like when you met me, I knew very little about any of this stuff, but it's like, well, I probably should know this stuff
if this is the game. Yeah. It's oh, dude, I know we could keep going, but I know you got to run Friday. Both of us got parenting and work shit to do. Thank you so much, man. It's been fun. I mean, over the years, and it's just fun being able to share the stories. And it's like, it's super cool. Like just being able to jump on a call like this and have the history and watching the real hard work. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So,
I agree.
All right, man. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and yeah, check out, we'll put your previous podcast in there in the show note links, but Thanks, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Cool. Good to see you, Ryan.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jimmy. I absolutely love watching the progress that he has made over the last 8 to 10 years. He really does the hard work and he's getting the outcomes that he deserves, even though it's not easy. And when some of the things that I have watched him achieve is the ability to make better decisions, which therefore ends up freeing up his time. And he is constantly trying to reinvest back into the company to get his time back, but then make sure that his lifestyle goals of time, cash, flow, and wealth from the ownership perspective are being focused on, and therefore allowing him to make decisions that are tied to real outcomes that matter to him, and making sure that he's still doing the hard work, but the hard work has to pay off. So it's just been super fun over the years watching Jimmy evolve, and he's put the hard work into not only the business, but educating himself so that way he knows what to work on and he's empowered himself. And so it's pretty cool. And I just appreciate him coming on. And if you wanted to learn a little bit more about some of the stuff that Jimmy and I were talking about, check out Tracy Beck's 60-Minute CFO podcast last week. If you did not, check out her training program. You can always go to ryantansom.com, where I'm constantly updating the website with some more of my material. And just to plant a seed is I'm working on this year for 2025. I'm going to be recording a bunch of videos and putting them all out for free on my website. So I'm going to continue to launch and build out more content so that way you all can continue diving further into this material and continue to empower yourself through education. I just want to say thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend or give it a rating on the podcast player that you're listening to. And I'm forever grateful for all the support. And I'll see you next week.